Hey everyone, I'm Kenyon. Welcome to another segment of our After Hours Screen Talk. I'm right here with my bro Dan, and today we're going to be talking about X-Men 97, the much anticipated Disney Plus series. We are going to go into some spoiler territory. Keep that in mind for those of you who are not like current and up to date on the show. That original 90s animated series, we watched it religiously at the time. Now we have this new reboot series. It definitely is recreating that 90s animation style, playing off that nostalgia, but also very much pushing the series forward and introducing darker adult themes.
I think the storytelling is so solid and gripping. I think the fact that it looks exactly like the original series, that they haven't changed a single thing about the style was great. It's about as good as this form of a kind of retro animation can be.
Particularly, it all goes down in episode 5. Remember it. That was just a fabulous episode.
Gambit's death, you just mentioned Remember It. On the one hand, I was like, that sucks. I love Gambit. Gambit was one of my favorite characters when he was introduced in the comic books. He was one of my favorite characters in the original series. I love the voice acting for him, both the original actor and the one who took over for this rendition. You talk about like a great death for a character. Just so cool too. It's like my name's Gambit, remember it, and then blows up the master mold. Runs chills down my spine. It was so heroic and this great sacrifice. The stakes are real. They killed one of my favorite characters, right? And at that point, before I'd watched the rest of the episodes, I also believed that they'd killed Magneto as well. I was like, Magneto and Gambit. That was a great episode. But also, I mean, not just Gambit's death, the drama of that, but also the action. As a kid, even when I loved the original series, I always remember being frustrated. They're holding back. They're treating me like a kid. I can take it, man. Get real here. Get violent. And they do, man. It's just like finally, these are the kinds of action scenes I wanted to see in the original run, right? But they were holding back because at that point they were still treating kids with kids' gloves, and that was probably a good thing, to be honest with you. But I love the action scenes. I love that whole battle with Master Mold. It's just so exciting and so gripping. This is the kind of programming I feel like I was craving when I was actually that age, and I was 12, 13 years old. These are the kinds of stories that would have really resonated with me then, and they still resonate with me now.
You mentioned Gambit's action scene in episode 2, and again, every action scene is a fabulous showcase for their superpowers, and Gambit is a
Mm.
prime example, like a beautiful send-off for the character. This show is really engaging with real world issues. And like the turn for me in the show really happened early on in episode 2, where you get that like direct reference in the show for the January 6th riots. In episode 2, you have the Friends of Humanity who are leading a right-wing terrorist squad against mutants and attacking the courthouse, and very much a direct metaphor for the insurrection. And actually, the Friends of Humanity are referred to as insurrectionists and terrorists in the show. And there's been a lot of like backlash against the show as woke. It's too political. Why are they introducing all this real world sociopolitical stuff and nonsense into it? When you look at the X-Men from the very beginning in the comics, it's always been engaging with what's going on in society. It's woven into the X-Men as a group who are bonded over their outsider status. Like Stan Lee had an interview with Rolling Stones in 2018, and he said this a number of times about conceiving the X-Men as like a metaphor for the civil rights movement. And like a quote here, he says, the main idea was to show that bigotry is really a terrible thing, and we should all get along with each other, no matter how different we are. That was the main objective.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting case of life imitates art because I mean these storylines are developing as Chris Claremont and his co-writer and or co-writers are developing these narratives in the late 70s, early 80s, and so on. They were reacting to similar issues going on in their own time. So you were telling me the other day that the mutant nation of Genosha, for instance, was originally conceptualized as symbolic of South African apartheid by Claremont. So
Yeah. Yeah. Claremont and co-writer Leonardi in 1988 introduced Genosha into the comics, and Genosha began as a totalitarian, authoritarian state that subjugated enslaved mutants within its borders. Claremont and Leonardi were very direct in referencing and making Genosha a metaphor for South African apartheid. As you said, Claremont really took it to another level in the 80s. Like, for example, another one that Claremont wrote was the graphic novel God Loves, Man Kills, which introduced Reverend
Mm,
William
mm.
Stryker, who is a fascist who leads a death squad against mutants, and their objective is the genocidal murder of all mutants, including children. And actually, in X-Men 97, in episode 8, William Stryker has a brief cameo. There's all these eerie parallels to the real world and to the political scene, put in the comics.
Well, I mean, I've come to the conclusion that when people say that they don't want, the materials they consume to be political, or they want people to keep their culture wars out of their face, what they really mean is that something rubbed them the wrong way. And I think that this is something that people have a problem with on the left and the right. But I mean, it's just one of those things where, like, did you agree with it or did you not agree with it? That's the operative question. And the reason the show works as well as it does, though, and I mean, this is going back to what we started talking about, is that I think that the producers understand that what they've got is an animation style that is beautiful and potent. This is a great medium for a dramatic, exciting, layered story, and they really kind of run with it. And they don't get bogged down in turning it into a kind of preachy, essayistic exercise. It always is just breakneck, gripping storytelling. At the same time that I'm aware of how layered it is and how complex, I'm also just flying by the seat of my pants, just desperately wanting to know what happens next. And just like you talk about the human drama and the characters and the battle scenes
But you have
prior
that
to,
nice Nightcrawler
yeah.
Wolverine action set
That's
piece.
right.
That was
Yeah, no, that
that
great.
was
No, and that
badass.
was a long time coming too, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because like Wolverine, or we've been talking about Wolverine, he's sidelined for most of the series, and I think that really works. I think that was a great idea to actually make him more of a side character. But when he finally has his day with Nightcrawler and can have that fight scene, that's great, man. That's lots of fun. If there's one complaint I have with the series is that where's Colossus? I love Colossus. Colossus was cool, man. He's this big metal guy. He's super strong. He's got this cool accent. He's from Russia,
Yeah.
and he was a core member of that Chris Claremont troupe, right? Wolverine, Colossus, Storm, Cyclops,
Yeah.
Nightcrawler. He was every bit as essential. He's one of those core members, right? Where is he? I want my Colossus.
I'm with you there. I think the show is going to give us everything we want, but I think it's like, let's save some things for later. Like,
Sure, sure.
Wolverine had a cool moment,
Mm.
and definitely I think they're going to put the focus on him at some point. But I think also Colossus is definitely going to show up.
Well, and as long as they keep handling it the way that they have, I'm not asking him to be the main character. I think if they treat him exactly the same way they've treated Nightcrawler and Wolverine and the other fan favorites, that would be all to the good. Just as long as he's there and a member of the team, he belongs there, man. I mean, I think he's earned that. Not to
Yep.
speak about him like he's real or anything, but he is kind of real to me.
Yep. Yep. I want to pivot and talk about episode 8, the most recent one. Another thing they do in this episode is tease X-Men 97's tie-ins to the greater
Mm,
MCU, because we have Cable, who is now part of this storyline, and he's from a different timeline. And he
mm,
comes back, and in this episode, he talks about absolute points in the timeline. There's, of course, the multiverse, the greater multiverse, and there's opportunity, possibility to reboot everything, reverse events, but you can't reverse absolute points in the timeline. And
yeah.
Genosha, according to Cable, is an absolute point in the timeline. It cannot be reversed.
Mm,
And
mm.
that's what I think gives the show some serious stakes. I mean,
Yeah.
that may or may not be the case, but if it is the case, then Gambit's not coming back.
My feeling is the Gambit is dead, right? I mean, I really do think that that character has been laid to rest
At least
because I
maybe
can't
that,
imagine a scenario for bringing him back that's not going to
yeah,
feel kind of cheap
yeah.
and contrived because he is a popular, beloved character.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it just removes the stakes, if they do that.
Yeah, if they can just bring characters back, right? It's like,
Yeah,
okay, so if somebody dies, who cares, right? Yeah, I want the stakes to be real. I kind of like the idea that he's dead, not because I don't love him, but because I want his death to really be real. I want that moment to be a real moment.
yeah.
Um, I mean, if he comes back, as long as they handle it right, I'm still here for that. But the other thing about the MCU, of course, is that it's a breath of fresh air for this series not to be burdened by it. I was reading up on it the other day, and X-Men 97 right now is not part of that. It's not part of that canon. It's not part of that multiverse yet. So all the references they've had, you see like Captain America, eventually you see Spider-Man, you see some other characters. Those aren't really multiverse moments. Those are references to other TV series, contemporaneous TV series that were running around the same time that X-Men was in its original form at 92 to 97. And so it's still within that kind of shared universe that's distinct from the MCU and the multiverse. Now, of course, Cable and that storyline provides an opportunity to make it more canon, right? To bring it into the MCU. There's all sorts of opportunities there, but then there's also risks as well. And I think we've talked about one of them, and that's like you can just keep rebooting things and burdening the story further with more characters and more plot lines. And yeah, it would have to be handled very carefully. And I've mentioned this in the past. I don't know if I've mentioned it in any of our videos, but one of the things that I find quite tiring about the Avengers movies and the other Marvel's films that I've seen more recently is that they seem so burdened and laden with characters and plot lines. And it's just sort of like at a certain point, it just feels like I'm watching this bloated carcass in its death throes, and it's like, will it die already? Can you please just be dead? Um, not, I mean, that's pretty uncharitable, right? But that's honestly how I feel. And so, Marvel burnout is real, I think, for that reason. One of the things that's great about X-Men 97 is that they do give you a great big dramatic story arc involving a lot of characters, but it also feels like this discrete, clean, really well handled narrative that has its own kind of integrity and its own kind of internal logic and isn't dependent on or preyed upon by any kind of larger paradigm that's always going to have to intrude somewhere so that they can have their synergistic moment and recycle it off into 1,000 points of other stories and other products, other IP.
Pre Endgame, I think they did do something pretty amazing by integrating all those movies and having it lead somewhere and have a big payoff. There's all that obligation at the same time for each movie and show to have a tie-in, and the pressure, as you mentioned, of that obligation that is just not present in X-Men 97. And that's why
Mm.
it works so well. And the storytelling is elevated because of that.
I don't think we've emphasized enough, or at least I don't feel like I've said it outright, is that this is my absolute favorite version of the X-Men other than the comics, right? This looks and feels and breathes like the X-Men, right? So it's like one of the things I've always felt about and been really frustrated with about the movies is that from film one to like film whatever, it's like these aren't X-Men. They don't look like the X-Men. They don't feel like the X-Men. These stories don't feel like the stories. So I mean, as good as I think Hugh Jackman is, like the style, the look, the expressiveness just aren't there. Here, finally, in this reboot of a TV series, a cartoon from the 90s, here are my X-Men finally. And it's really exciting and inspiring.
The X-Men are supposed to have richness and color to them. And part of
And they're
that,
all supposed to look different. They're not all supposed
yeah,
to be in black. They're not all supposed to be in gray or brown or whatever,
yeah, it
you
doesn't have
know?
to look like the Matrix.
No.
And yeah, I totally agree. The Fox X-Men were a mixed bag, and the majority of those films from the Fox series I found underwhelming, apart from some smart casting choices with Hugh Jackman as Wolverine being the standout.
I think one of the problems with the points of view that producers seem to have about these films, and I see this in the current spate of superhero films, is that they feel like it either needs to be really serious and really substantial and really, really dark and emotional, or it's just going to be completely cornball and superficial, right? It can be both, right? I mean, that's the great thing about the comic books is that it's big and cheesy and outrageous and overdone and hyperbolic, but it's also real and raw and immersive, and you're invested in these characters. It's melodrama, really. I mean,
Oh
it's
yeah.
melodrama for boys and for girls. I'd also like to see more of a humor, more of a lightness in these films as well. And as heavy as X-Men 97 is, I think there is that component. I think there is this sense that it's not all gloom and doom, that these characters have a kind of lightness and an emotional roundedness beyond just being the brooding characters that their crisis-filled situations call them to be. So let's embrace the lightness. I have to say I've really gone back and reevaluated the Joel Schumacher Batman films for that reason. I think we need a
Oh
little
dear.
more lightness in these narratives. Um,
Okay, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think as terrible and cringy, particularly Batman and Robin was, I agree. I don't want Batman to go that far in that
mm.
direction, but I think the Batman franchise, like you said, could really benefit by having a sense of fun, you
Well,
know?
read the comic books. I mean, Batman has plenty of fun in those comics. He enjoys what he does.
You
You know what I
know?
think is really interesting though is that we're always more comfortable doing this in animation because isn't that exactly what they finally gave us in the Batman animated series? It was serious and dark and real, but it was also always they always kept the levity, and Batman was not just this constantly brooding, clinically depressed character. He had fun, right?
I am really digging X-Men 97. I think we both can say that we're really on board for where they go next and where they take the series next. They've already greenlit season 2 and 3, so we got a lot more coming. It's a breath of fresh air for comic book storytelling and also animation. And I always look forward every week to the new episode. Those are our thoughts on X-Men 97. And we'll look forward to seeing how the show wraps. And please share your comments below and let us know if you're tuning into the series. Are you an X-Men fan? And we'll have more content coming your way soon. So be well, and we'll see you later here.